Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Blurred Lines. My name is Ashley or Ashtootrippy. Whatever you'd like to call me is totally fine. A lot of you guys know me as Ashtootrippy. I wanted to start this episode by thanking each and every one of you guys that have stuck with me, of course. Last week's episode was a hit. So if you guys haven't listened to last week's episode, go on your feed and check out the yogurt chop murders then and now here on Blurred Lines. Today we have a case that is very disturbing, so I have to give you a content warning. This episode contains descriptions of kidnapping, sexual assaults, and other forms of violence that may be distressing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised, especially for younger audiences. The goal of this episode is to inform and raise awareness, not to sensationalize these crimes. When I decided to do this, I want you guys to kind of have a preference before I start the episode here. I live in New Mexico. I have been born and raised in New Mexico. This story is so close to the fact that me and my husband actually met at this lake, and we heard stories about this guy, and I just wanted to give you guys that preference into why this is so close, and I'll insert a little bit of experiences with the area as well, so I have a kind of a different perspective on some of this. Today's story takes us to a quiet lakeside community in New Mexico, and as I stated, that's where I live, and most of you guys are aware of that. This is a tiny town called Elephant Butte, just north of TRC, Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. It's a small, friendly town surrounded by desert and water. The kind of place where everyone seems to know everyone. Very small. But in the 1990s, police uncovered something there that stunned the entire nation. A man named David Parker Ray would later become known as the Toy Box Killer, though technically he was never convicted of murder. What investigators found on his property would lead to one of the most disturbing and puzzling criminal cases in modern U.S. history. David Parker Ray was born in 1939 in Belen, New Mexico. His early life was difficult. His father was abusive and often absent, and he was raised mostly by his strict grandfather. Friends from school described him as quiet and awkward, often bullied. From a young age, Ray was fascinated by mechanics. He loved fixing cars, building gadgets, and taking things apart. That skill would later define both his career and, unfortunately, also his crimes. As a teenager, he began showing early signs of deviant interests. Family members discovered drawings and magazines depicting bondage and control, early clues to darker thoughts that would grow over time. After high school, Ray joined the Army and trained as a mechanic. He married multiple times and had children, but his relationships were short-lived. People who knew him said he could be charming one moment and coldly distant the next. Now here's a little bit of life at Elephant Butte. By the 1990s, Ray was living in Elephant Butte, working as a maintenance worker for the local parks department. He was known in town as reliable and quiet. No one suspected that behind his property, he was building something he called the Toy Box. The Toy Box was actually a large converted trailer. Inside, Ray created soundproofed environment filled with equipment he had collected or built himself. Investigators later found that the trailer was lined with restraint devices, tools, and surveillance equipment. To outsiders, it looked like a mechanic's workshop. To law enforcement, once they discovered it, it looked like a planned environment for kidnapping and assault. Ray had a longtime girlfriend named Cindy Hendy, who would later become his accomplice. Together, they lived relatively normal lives in public, shopping in town, going to local events, while concealing what was happening in that trailer. Let's talk a little bit about Cindy Hendy for a moment. So in my research of this, because even though I've grown up in an area that talked about this man a lot, I still needed to research the players, and I was very young when this crime took place. Cindy Hendy was Ray's girlfriend, and Cindy Hendy is no longer in jail. She actually, I believe, relocated to, I think it was Sacramento is what I read. And she basically was released, I believe it was in 2019. It's just crazy to me that she just basically got away with everything, because it's crazy to think that she was actually luring girls and now she's in a community with people even after serving her time. What's to make you think that she recovered? But anyways, that's where Cindy Hendy is right now. Now, if the man wasn't evil enough, David Parker Ray didn't act alone, as I stated. Alongside his girlfriend Cindy Hendy, there were other people linked to his crimes, including his own daughter, Glenda Jessie Ray, and an associate named Dennis Yancey. Each played a different role. Hendy helped lure potential victims and later testified that she participated in some of the assaults. Yancey admitted to helping Ray dispose of at least one body, though physical evidence was never found for that. The group primarily targeted vulnerable individuals, women who were isolated, transient, or struggling with addiction. This made it easier for them to go unnoticed and harder for victims to be believed if they ever came forward. Which to me is very, very maniacal, right? To target people that are at the end of their rope because life just came and took them, right? To me, that's more deviant behavior than anything else that we've seen. I think that that's what makes this man such a prolific killer. Now, I want to read, and what we're going to talk about her in a little bit, but Cynthia V. Hill was a survivor of David Parker Ray. She has a wonderful website up, and I want to read her portion of things. It goes into what happened to the accomplices, so I thought it was just really cool. I will leave the website down in the show notes below. This woman's story is very inspirational. Here's from CynthiaVHill.com, her website that she has. In March 1999, I was kidnapped in Albuquerque and transported to Elephant Butte, New Mexico, where I was collared, chained, and tortured for 3 days by David Parker Ray, also known as the Toy Box Killer, and his female accomplice, Cindy Hendy. Having lost both my mother and my best friend to murders, I was determined to escape. When Ray left the home to go to work and Hendy was on the phone, I seized the opportunity to grab the key to release myself from the chain. Hendy realized what was happening and tried to stop me, which led to an altercation with Hendy being hit in the head with an ice pick by me. At this point, I was able to run out of the house, naked with the metal collar still around my neck, and brought national attention to a man who is thought to have murdered 58 plus people. I encountered permanent nerve damage as a result of the torture, but was never compensated. Ray died in prison shortly after being convicted and sentenced to 224 years. So, spoiler alert on that, sorry guys. Hendy was also convicted and then released from prison in 2019. Another of Ray's accomplice, Dennis Roy Yancey, was sentenced to 30 consecutive years but was released on probation in 2011. Yancey later received a DUI, resulting in his probation being revoked and caused him to serve another 8 years. Ray's third accomplice, Jessie Ray, David Parker Ray's daughter, was sentenced to probation but later violated her probation. She served 2.5 years in prison for her crimes against the woman and 5 years of probation. Jessie likely received leniency because she had attempted to warn authorities about her father or because Ray made a deal for her. Yet with the years that passed and all the accomplices privy to the crimes, the bodies of Jill Trio and Marie Parker, no relation to David Parker Ray, along with 58 plus people suspected to have been murdered, still have not been found. So again, this is from one of the survivors' websites, Cynthia V. Hill, and it's cynthiavhill.com. Again, I will leave the link to that down in the show notes so you guys can check out her full story. And we're going to hear a little bit about her here, how she fought back here, kind of just to kind of bring the story together. So this case might have never come to light if it wasn't for one woman's escape. On March 22nd, 2019, 22-year-old Cynthia V. Hill was kidnapped in Albuquerque and taken to Ray's trailer. For several days, she was restrained inside the toy box. But when Ray left for work and Hendy became distracted, Cynthia managed to free herself. She fought back, escaping the trailer, and ran down a dirt road until she found help from a nearby resident, still partially restrained. When police arrived, her story seemed almost unbelievable, but they quickly realized she was telling the truth. Her escape led to a search of Ray's property that would uncover one of the most shocking crime scenes in New Mexico history. Now we're going to go a little bit into the investigation of the toy box and David Parker Ray. Inside the toy box, police found hundreds of items of evidence, notes, photographs, videotapes, and detailed descriptions of assaults spanning years, possibly even decades. There were handwritten journals cataloging victims by date and description. Some entries went back to the 1950s. If that wasn't disturbing enough, investigators also discovered an audio tape, a pre-recorded message Ray would play for his victims, calmly explaining what was about to happen. The level of organization stunned law enforcement. But there was one major problem. There were no bodies. Despite detailed evidence of abductions, no remains were ever recovered. The nearby Elephant Butte Lake was searched extensively, as were surrounding desert areas and mine shafts. Nothing definitive was found. This was because David Parker Ray dismembered and disposed of the remains in the lake as well as the ravines and within the vastness of the desert area. He also had detailed knowledge of Elephant Butte Lake. Now, I want you guys to kind of understand that Elephant Butte Lake, this is a lake where in some areas they can't really reach the bottom because of its muddy underneath. Now, it is said that David Parker Ray basically told his girlfriend how he buried the bodies in the lake. She told this to the authorities that basically he would cut them open. This is very disturbing, guys. I'm sorry. He would cut them open, hollow out everything, their organs, everything inside, and fill their chest cavity with cement. And he would wrap them up, bundle up the remains because he would dismember them and everything, bundle them up with bundling wire, and he would go and dump them in the lake. So can you imagine like all of that? And not only that, this lake does have fish, very big fish actually. So if you can imagine that taking place, it's not really surprising that they didn't find remains, but also you have to remember that the state of New Mexico in a whole is vast. Elephant Butte Lake is not that far from Albuquerque. It's not that far from, like we said, Truth or Consequences is just north of it. He can go to any one of these areas and dispose of bodies, which also preludes me into, I don't know if I'll do this episode next week or the week prior to that, but I am also going to be doing in Albuquerque, on the west side area in Albuquerque, there was 14 women that were found in a mass grave, and nobody really, those weren't ever solved. Like, they have some ideas, but they don't really know who did that. So that's another one that will prelude me, because I really do feel like David Parker Ray may have had a hand in that, or may have met up with somebody that was just as maniacal as him, and this took place. But this could have been several different serial killers, and maybe they had a network. Maybe we could go a little bit into conspiracy theories with that one. Just stay tuned for that. Now, because of not being able to find those bodies, prosecutors couldn't charge Ray with murder, only with kidnapping and torture, because how he documented those events. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the arrest and the trial. So Ray was arrested and eventually charged with numerous counts of kidnapping and assault. He initially faced the possibility of the death penalty, but in 2000, he reached a plea deal. Now, here's to show that plea deals aren't always a deal, okay? So he was facing the death penalty, but he took a deal, and he was sentenced to 224 years in prison. Cindy Hendy, who testified against him, received 36 years and was released in 2019. His daughter, Glenda Ray, served shorter sentence for her role in the crimes, as we had heard before. And that's most likely due to David Parker Ray advocating for her, or the fact that she did try to alert authorities to this. David Parker Ray never served long. He died of a heart attack in 2002, only 3 years into his sentence. Even in death, he left behind unanswered questions. Most importantly, what happened to the women investigators believe he may have killed. Now, the FBI estimates David Parker Ray may have had up to 60 victims, though only few have ever been confirmed or came forward. Without physical evidence, the true number truly remains unknown. So we can assume 60, but is there more? Over the years, the case has continued to fascinate investigators and criminologists. Ray's level of preparation and control suggested a deeply methodical mind, someone who saw his crimes as systems rather than spontaneous acts. To this day, Elephant Butte carries the shadow of what happened there. The trailer was dismantled, but the questions remained. How many victims were there really? How did he manage to hide his crimes for so long in such a small town? And could others have been involved that we still don't know about? Those are all the questions we definitely have. And so, like I said, we used to go to this lake probably 2 times a year, 3 times a year. As a teenager, you heard, oh, there was bodies at the bottom of that lake, and you hear about David Parker Ray. I even remember going by where the area he lived in, and you got to remember, this is a very small town, so if you're in Elephant Butte, it's not like out of the way to go there, right? And I believe my sister-in-law had read the book that had came out. I don't know which one it was, but there's numerous books that have came out, because this guy was prolific. I don't remember which one it was, but I remember that she was kind of fascinated with it, and I remember they had taken us out there and stuff, and I didn't even remember what it was, because back then I wasn't really into this stuff. I watched like Dateline and all that stuff with my grandma, but that was like the extent of my true crime stuff. But like I said, I met my husband out this lake. We used to go there at least 3 times a year when I was a teenager. When I tell you that there is kind of like a dark shadow over that lake, there really is. Now, that lake has been really low over the years, but like I said, a lot of people say there's not necessarily a bottom, and when there is a bottom, they have like this where they do see the bottom, it's this sinking sand that kind of just engulfs everything. They've found cars in that lake before. They found so much stuff in that lake. Like it's astounding. There's also like little coves where, if we know David Parker Ray did know all of the little areas of the lake, there is little coves along there where like you can't see it unless you have a boat, and you can't get there unless you have like some all-terrain vehicle, which if you're in that area, sometimes you do. And there is houses around these coves and stuff like that. So I'm assuming he probably knew how to get there. This crime is just, I don't feel like people talk about it enough, just because I think we get wrapped up in the Jeffrey Dahmers and the ones that take the spotlight. But when something like this happens and that killer is no longer alive, I think a lot of people let it fade kind of into the abyss, especially when nobody's talking about it. So that's the reason I wanted to do that today, because I think a lot of people aren't aware of it. And like I said, I am going to be doing a podcast. I don't think maybe it will be the next one, just so we can kind of coincide it together, one after another. But like I said, there were women found out in a mesa in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I think that the timelines match for possibly some of them being David Parker Ray's victims. I also wanted to add that if you search David Parker Ray, the FBI comes up and they cataloged everything they found in his trailer and in that toy box. It was a lot of jewelry, some clothing, some undergarments, and things like that. So if you have a family member that went missing in the New Mexico, or even could be possibly last seen in the New Mexico area in the 90s, definitely look into those, because they, like I said, they haven't really identified most of his victims. And I think that if there's any kind of evidence that people have, or if they're suspecting of that, definitely go look that up and contact the FBI directly. The Toy Box Killer case is more than just a disturbing chapter in true crime. It's a reminder of how easy cruelty can hide behind normalcy, and how critical it is that every voice, no matter how unbelievable it might sound, is heard. Again, I'm Ashtootrippy. This has been Blurred Lines. Thank you guys for listening and for always being willing to look beyond the surface. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep your eyes open for the truth, even when it's hiding behind the blur. Talk to you guys next time. Bye.